The honourable member for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honour to follow my esteemed colleague regarding the Liberals' intent to repeal Bills 377 and 525. Both these bills were about transparency, and as my colleague earlier talked about, the first bills we introduced as a government were about increasing transparency, and basically one of the first acts of this Liberal government is to introduce bills to reduce transparency. Bill 377 had an important purpose. The purpose is to extend the principle of public disclosure to a group of institutions that enjoy substantial public benefits, and this is key, labour organizations. Public disclosure will increase the confidence of Canadians that unions spend their money wisely and effectively. Regarding Bill C-525, which dealt with the issue of voting rights, it replaced a system called card check, and the card check system allowed for a workplace to be unionized without allowing all employees to express their opinions. In fact, the unionization of a workplace could occur without a significant portion of the bargaining unit having been made aware. So again, both of these bills dealt with improving transparency. And again, in our strong view, Canadian union workers have the right to know how their mandatory union dues are spent. That is why our government passed Bill C-377 and C-525. Repealing these laws sends a very clear message. The Liberal government cares more about thanking union bosses who did everything in their power to help them get elected, rather than the thousands of hard-working union members whose dues were spent without consultation. And union leaders need to be held accountable and tell their members and the public how their tax-advantaged income is spent. And the Conservative Party will continue to support union transparency and stand up for union workers. And as I have said in a couple of my other speeches, it is becoming quite clear that the only party that cares about the Canadian workers and Canadian workers' families is the Conservative Party of Canada. Again, even some labour organizations are very strongly in favor of our bill. The Christian Labour Association talked about, Dick Heinen, the executive director in February 2014, said, "Now fundamentally the CLAC believes in competition in the labour relations environment in Canada. We think that workers should have the right and be free to make their own choices when it comes to which union represents them or whether they want to be represented by a union at all." As well, John Farrell, the executive director of the federally regulated Employers Transportation and Communications Union, he was in his testimony to the Senate said FETCO members prefer a secret ballot vote to a card check system for the purpose of determining if a union is to become a certified bargaining agent for employees. A secret ballot vote is the essence of a true democratic choice and is entirely consistent with Canadian democratic principles. It allows each and every employee to express their true wishes without undue influence or disclosure of how they cast their ballot. This is the mechanism that is used for the electoral process in Canada and is quite simply the fairest of all. And Mr. Speaker, it's no coincidence that the public sector union bosses worked hard to get the Liberal government elected. And now, quite frankly, it's payback time. And the first thing that the Liberal government is doing is repealing these two very important bills, C-377 and C-525. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Treasury Board Minister made a point of announcing that he's restoring the sick leave benefit to the public sector. That's a cost of $900 million a year. That's $900 million that is not available for health care, the environment, agriculture, infrastructure, but again, we can see it is definitely payback time. And now we have a government that is beholden to these public sector union bosses. Quite interestingly, what I'm seeing as a trend in the House here and in government is a merging of the ideology of the Liberals and the NDP. We have the champagne socialists riding with the limousine Liberals. And both of them, and quite frankly, the NDP haven't changed. They're still the party of bad ideas and toxic policies. What is changing is the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is moving very quickly left. And again, their alliance with public sector union bosses against the interests of Canadians in general is proof of that. And what's interesting, I actually would like to call up the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, and we should list a species called the blue liberal. which is now endangered. The Liberal who actually cared about business, some prominent blue Liberals were talking in favor of pipelines and economic development and free trade, and they're being completely ignored. So I think the Species at Risk Act needs to look at the blue Liberal. So we can see, given that it's payback time, let's just imagine what's going on in the negotiation room between the government and the public sector unions. If you don't think for a minute that the public sector unions don't sit down and point their fingers at the relevant Liberal negotiators and say, look, we got you elected and you better deliver. And for the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party is bargaining with the same group that helped bring it into power. And the Treasury Board president is making a sham of trying to talk tough, but we know what will really go on behind closed doors. These negotiations that are occurring are fundamentally flawed. There's another word I could use, but it's quite unparliamentary. And the negotiations will be all about how much they can fleece the taxpayer. Unfortunately, the public sector unions have become an entity unto themselves. And we see the evolution of public sector unions into powerful political entities that in some cases can determine who forms the government. And the public sector unions will always remind the Liberals who got them elected, and the public interest itself will be left behind. This is bad for democracy, and it's bad for our country. The public service is supposed to be neutral and carry out the wishes of the duly elected government of the day, but the trends that I'm seeing make me very, very uneasy. And again, I want to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, as this session evolves and the legislation evolves, it is becoming quite clear that the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party that stands up for the workers of Canada. We defend the natural resource industries, we defend the oil sands, we encourage the growth of pipelines. We are the only people that care about working families in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? I'll remember for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Dauphin, Swan River, and Nepewana for his comments. And I want to sort of think back to April and May of last year when the Liberal Party of Canada came out with its strong policy position on how best to rebalance the rights of workers and employers in Canada, certainly at the federal level. Long before any of the real rigor of the campaign had started, it was a clear policy and it earned the support of Canadians. It was a policy that got to the heart of what Canadians wanted vis-a-vis the balance of workers and employer rights at the federal level, and people swarmed to it. It wasn't a situation where the Liberal Party of Canada was cowing to the desires of unions. They were putting forward a policy that really spoke to what Canadians wanted and desired and earned it. Alors, mon question pour le membre, c'est...
My question for the member is, why does he think that Canadians made a mistake? They chose the Liberal Party during the election, and this is the policy that we're going to implement now.
From the Swan River, Nicola.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the fact that the public sector unions are so adept at determining, in many cases, who forms the government, they work very hard. They work very hard for the Liberal Party in the last election campaigns. Tells me that what our bills did was provide the true rebalancing between the rights of Canadian citizens at large, Canadian society, and the democratic rights of voters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for questions and comments. The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
For Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa suggests that the tax deductibility of union dues is some sort of special privilege. Mr. Speaker, we afford exactly the same tax treatment to all employment expenses. But let's imagine that the deduction of dues had something to do with Bill 377. I wonder if the honourable member could explain to us why this legislation was only imposed on trade unions and not applied to medical associations, bar associations, and other professional associations whose dues are also tax deductible.
Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nicola.
I want to really thank the member for the question because he's given me the opportunity to point out union membership is forced. You have no choice if you're working in certain workplaces whether you can join the union or not. And you have to pay the union dues. Professional associations they are regulatory bodies that deal with the technical capabilities of the individual members involved. They are technical and scientific organizations where members have to have the skills, they ensure the members have the skill set to practice the profession of law or medicine or so on. Unions are very, very different. Not only are the union dues tax deductible, members are forced to pay those union dues or they will not be able to have a job. That's the difference.
Questions et commentaires. Honorable.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Repentigny. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All of the Conservatives, the former Conservative government's union laws were based on false premises. Unions provides for better distribution of wealth and wage fairness, and we've talked about this a lot this week. And in non-unionized jobs, wage fairness cannot be taken for granted. 70% of workers in Quebec are unionized, and that is where the middle class is treated as being the most important. What is the middle class is in danger in this country. So what do the Conservatives have against the middle class?
What?
The member makes a fundamental mistake in assuming that this party is anti-union. We are not. I come from a proud union family, and my father was a union organizer in the 30s when you really had to be tough to organize unions. So unions absolutely have their place to ensure workers' rights and in terms of compensation and so on. In this particular case, we are dealing with the special privileges that are allocated to unions by law. And I think the transparency legislation, both bills we had, were eminently fair to ensure the rights of citizens and also to ensure that unions operate as they should. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.